Shalom from Jerusalem. This is TV7's Israel at War update. And as we're set to deliberate the latest developments throughout the Middle East, with Israel in particular, it's always important to remember that the Islamist Hamas and its terror affiliates in the Gaza Strip had launched an onslaught on southern Israel 530 days ago, October 7th of 2023, during the course of which they have kidnapped approximately 250 individuals, murdered some 1,200, and wounded over 4,800. But nonetheless, 59 people are still in Hamas captivity, most of them, unfortunately, no longer amongst the living, but nonetheless, hostilities resumed in the Gaza Strip. And on that, let's now turn to central Israel, where we're joined by Brigadier General in Reserve, Dr. Amnon Sofrin, formerly the Chief of Intelligence at Mossad, as well as a senior IDF Intelligence Directorate officer. It's great to see you, General. What can you tell us on the latest vis-a-vis the Gaza Strip?
I think that Israel conveyed a message to Hamas that if you won't go on with the deal of releasing people that are imprisoned by yourself in Gaza Strip, we will apply full pressure. And this is only the beginning. This is only a demonstration of or projection of power. And we can do much more than that. And the second message, which is hidden in the first one, is that nobody is immune, including people that belong to the what we call the military or political wing of Hamas. People that were killed, 5 of them were killed by this attack. Took Hamas by surprise, and of course, this is a message that we can go on and we can apply more pressure. It's up to you to decide how to carry on with this game.
Thank you, General Sofrin. Let's now turn to elsewhere in central Israel, where we're joined by Colonel in Reserve Reuven Ben Shalom, who is a cross-cultural strategist, a long-time panelist at TV7 Israel. And I'd like to immediately dive into a question also on the Gaza Strip. We see the United Nations coming out, its Secretary General, on the one hand, condemning Israel for the resumption of hostilities in the Gaza Strip, leaving Hamas out of the picture, which is quite blatant in uncertain terms. But nonetheless, he also highlights hundreds of casualties in the first Israeli aircraft strikes, which subsequently, during a UN Security Council meeting, we saw also his Under-Secretary General for Humanitarian Affairs coming out and stating that those casualties are unverified. So are we to take serious what this UN Secretary General is saying?
Well, Jonathan, I spent more than a year explaining this from the official side, and I felt like I'm constantly chasing these narratives. Finally, I'm not only a civilian, but in a way, I don't care anymore. Certainly not what the UN says. It's a battle of narratives. Many times, as you said, the enemy, the terror organization that can behead babies, burn people alive, but they won't lie about figures of the casualties on their side. So that's ridiculous. I don't intend to chase that anymore. And certainly in this kind of campaign, there are casualties. Look even what happened today. There were reports about UN officials that were hit or targeted or something like that. Immediately, the narrative is Israel struck. It was an Israeli strike. Israel said, we did not do that. So as usual, you'll have the headlines, and then we'll start chasing those headlines and start to explaining. All we need to do is to say what we're doing. The context now is the continued clash with Hamas, or you could say negotiations with Hamas, negotiations with words that collapsed and goes back to negotiations with fire. And hopefully we'll go back to words, because ultimately the main goal that we should try to achieve now is to bring back our hostages. We also want to eliminate Hamas as a governmental power, as a military power. But first and foremost, our goal as Israelis should be to bring our people back home.
Absolutely, and the sooner the better. Nevertheless, we need to remember that Hamas is the one that has refused to extend stage 1, which was supposed to be, according to the outline of the arrangement, the process in which negotiations were to be focusing on stage 2. And despite the demand to immediately jump into stage 2, it is empty of any substance. So there are two sides to each coin, and Hamas seems to be very keen on disinformation with the help of many of its regional actors and global supporters at that. But also joining the conversation is Brigadier General in Reserve Yaron Rosen, the former IDF Chief of Cyber Staff and Israel Air Force commander, as well as a pilot. What can you tell us about that, General Rosen, also with focus on the Gaza Strip?
Yeah, I think there's an ongoing theme here in the Middle East about how our enemies are miscalculating how Israel operates. Hamas sort of believed Israel would prioritize the ceasefire talks over military action, but Israel has chosen to negotiate under fire, not under a ceasefire, because the Hamas is not giving back our hostages. Now, there is a question here. Does more military pressure actually weaken Hamas, or does it have, or then we are left with no one to negotiate with? That's a very serious concern that we should be thinking about vis-a-vis the hostage dilemma. We, on one hand, we're dealing with these mobs, these mobsters, mafia families, literally holding, each one of them holding a few of our hostages. And now, how do you organize a real military style campaign to really have some kind of structure of pressure that will really influence the decision maker, the person that eventually will release the hostages? It's a very, very complex situation that Israel is in. And again, because the end game is to dismantle completely Hamas and to obliterate them, this is something that will, in some kind of shape and form, be one on expense of the other. If you want to completely release the hostages, you will need to let go of some of your goals vis-a-vis Hamas and take care of them later on in the future, or the other way around, which means that some of the hostages will not be alive because you would be constantly running again and again after the last standing Hamas. So Israel is hitting Hamas hard, but the cost, if we remain with no one to negotiate with, the end game is very, very questionable.
Bleak scenario with, of course, dire consequences. I very much hope that the leadership takes the right decisions in this context. But the Iranian proxy Ansar Allah, which is dominated by the Houthi tribe, has announced that it is resuming hostilities against Israel directly. A ballistic missile was launched towards Israeli territory with rocket alert sirens sounded in the Negev region, Beersheba, and other locations. The Israel Air Force announced that it intercepted that specific ballistic missile outside of Israeli airspace, but nonetheless, it does indicate an uptick in the escalation ladder. General Sofrin, what can you tell us about that, and to what degree does Israel intend to stay on the sidelines when it comes to the Houthis in light of the American campaign that is current?
I believe that we have to look at two dimensions when we speak about the Houthis. The first one is regarding Israel. As long as the ceasefire was invalid, they threatened that they are going to hit any vessel that is going to get to Israel via the Red Sea, and specifically only vessels that are moving or sailing towards Israel, and that's it. And when we began attacking one more time on Gaza Strip 2 days ago, they changed the tune and they said, okay, now we are going to engage Israel directly because we are supporting the Palestinians in Gaza, because they're obliged to assist them, and we are going to engage Israel as best as we can with our own capabilities. That means they're trying to differ themselves from the Iranians and other proxies as well, but to say that this is our decision. Now, when you look at what happened, they launched two missiles. The first one fell at the area of Sharm el-Sheikh, and we don't know exactly was it aimed to hit Israel or not. And the second one was aimed to hit, as they published at least, on Nevatim Air Base. And if you connect it to what the Iranians did on the two attacks on 2034, they tried to hit Nevatim specifically. And this connects these two dots. That means that they were probably recommended or ordered by the Iranians to hit Nevatim as what we call as a preferred target. And that means that they're connected to each other, even though the Iranians sent a message to the Security Council of the United Nations, claiming that they don't have anything to do with the Houthis, and the Houthis are operating only independently, and they don't have any relations with the Iranians, meaning they, in a way, they went out of control. And this is for the American administration that to say that please, we're not interfering with that, and you can't blame us for what the Houthis are doing right now.
Ben Shalom, naturally, the Iranians are, I'll put it the way Admiral Bradford Cooper put it at the time during his interview of the 60 Minutes when he still was a vice admiral and commander of NAVCENT, which is the maritime component of Central Command. He said that it's pretty much an RGC officer standing next to a Houthi operative, pointing to the target, giving him the weapon, and telling him pull the trigger. That's naturally the context of this relationship between the two. How should Israel engage in this context?
Well, it's interesting because a lot of what happened in this war, I think, was showing the true face of Iran and its proxies and, in a way, their strategy. In the past, it was more of trying to figure out how this operates, and then Iran helped us understand by attacking us directly, by operating its proxies. Now, in a way, they're trying to cloak it again with this kind of rhetoric. And of course, the Houthis themselves have their agenda and even this kind of tension between them and Iran. But we understand the way the mechanism works. It's not a coincidence that the US administration just told Iran that every shot coming out of the Houthis, we will see it as coming out of you. It's one strategy. Iran is leading all of this, but certainly these proxies once in a while can do something. The same thing, I don't claim that what Hamas did on October 7th was something that was exactly calculated and approved by the rest of the Axis. Maybe if it would have been better coordinated, that attack would have been more successful from their perspective. As far as what the Houthis do, every time they launch a missile like this, they enable Israel to demonstrate our incredible capabilities and technologies, and also demonstrate our wonderful cooperation, regional and international. So this and that missile is no big deal for us in a way. I'm not going to say ridiculous, because still it's a missile, okay, going out into outer space, and its trajectory is aiming towards Israel. But that's not the main thing. The main thing is their threat on freedom of navigation. It disrupts world economy. It impacts all our neighbors, mainly Egypt, by the way. And this is why it's an international issue, and Israel has been saying so all along. We contribute, we help a lot under the radar, but of course rely on the international community to address this, mainly now the more stronger rhetoric coming out of the US that hopefully will also mean more kinetic action.
Absolutely, and let's see, maybe this is also viewed now in Washington as an Iranian attack on Israel, not only a Houthi one, if we're taking the words of President Donald Trump literally, and that is something that White House Press Secretary has stated we should take it literally, so let's wait and see what that actually means. But General Rosen, within this context, naturally, the two main state actors to suffer from the so-called maritime blockade of the strategic Strait of Bab el-Mandeb remain Egypt and Jordan, for that matter, since both countries are heavily reliant, at least their economies are heavily reliant on their ports. How can they contribute to a scenario in which they say, okay, enough is enough. We need to confront this threat in a fashion that will once again reinvigorate our failing economies.
Yeah, it's definitely kind of a miracle, but I'll tell you what stands behind the miracle, why Egypt is not so loud about the Houthis greatly interrupting their income from the Suez Canal, because they got money from someone to basically stay quiet. And if you look around and try to see who's paying for all this, it basically will show you exactly the groups that are involved in this quarrel. And it actually takes us to the global level of this. How much is China paying Egypt in order to maybe be quiet about the Bab el-Mandab skirmishes against the freedom of navigation? It's something that I would check very closely. But having said that, I think that what the United States is doing very cleverly now, once the administration has changed, gladly, is it is tearing the proxy war playbook. Basically, it's saying that no more hiding behind a proxy. It's not acceptable. If you're doing something, whether directly or indirectly, and vis-a-vis Iran, Tehran is now responsible for its proxies, period. That's what every country that is operating through indirect measures in the Middle East should consider. Now, there are more powers in play right now. There are many powers now that are in play in Syria, which we have to to look carefully at as Syria is reshaping itself. There are powers that are influencing Lebanon, and all this will influence the future stability of the Middle East. So sending this message now to Tehran, directly, to the Houthis, to the Hezbollah in Iraq, that they cannot interfere in what's going on now, is part of the reshaping of the whole region. It's not only about the Bab el-Mandab Straits and the freedom of navigation. It's about reshaping the whole play, the whole geostrategic play in the region.
General Sofrin, first, before I refer the next question to you, I must say that the European Union are also paying Egypt some 7.4 billion euros over the course of the year, and additional actors are very, very much involved. I have not checked the Chinese angle, even though I know that China has a robust investment, if I may call it that, in the infrastructure of Egypt. So those are question marks that need to be identified indeed. General Sofrin, there was obviously a discussion, if we remain on the strategic power competition level, between President Donald Trump and the Russian President Vladimir Putin to basically hammer out the arrangement they have with regard to a partial ceasefire, particularly about not attacking energy infrastructure on both sides as a first step. At the same time, in that same conversation, both leaders have announced and called upon Iran not to pursue a nuclear weapon capability, saying that they should not have that capability. And we're hearing more and more strong statements coming out of Washington, if I may call it that, saying that the United States is committed that the Islamic Republic will not achieve nuclear weapon capabilities. What are we to take on that?
I think that this administration is very determined that Iran will not have, at least for the coming years, the capability to produce nuclear weapon systems. And they do it on two dimensions. The first one is to apply what we call coercive diplomacy. That means to apply economical sanctions on Iran on one hand. On the second hand, to send message to Iran, to convey a message to Iran that if you are not going to apply, we're going to apply more pressure, and everything is on the table. That means we can consider definitely to use what we call military force in order to force you to go to this agreement, to the new agreement, that in the end will postpone the capabilities of Iran to achieve nuclear weapon systems for 20 years ahead and something like that. Nobody really knows the specific details. And of course, it is coordinated with Israel, and everybody wants to get to the same equation that Iran will not have weapon systems in the coming years. It can be demolished totally, but in the end, to postpone it as much as we can for the coming years ahead. On the second hand, they're applying what we call another pressure that convey a message to Iran. The first one is the message that was conveyed via the Houthis, that if the Houthis are going to launch even one bullet or to shoot one bullet, we will blame you for being responsible for that. And this is connecting directly Iran to the proxies and not hiding behind the mask of what we call, or President Trump at least defined it, what we call the innocent victim. You are not an innocent victim because you are being the one to be blamed. And the Ministry of Defense of the United States published that at least 3 more carrier groups are going or supposed to get very soon to the Middle East and to apply more pressure on Iran. And in the end, Iran is going to be isolated for its proxies because Hezbollah is very weak. Hamas doesn't really affect the big proxies. The only proxies that's left right now is the Houthis. And they are isolated and are being attacked by the United States. And so Iran is becoming isolated. It doesn't have anti-aircraft capabilities to defend itself because most of its systems were demolished by Israel. And therefore, Iran will be getting more heat as time goes by in order to force it to go to negotiating table and to get to some new agreement.
I don't think people realize this, and much of this is not public knowledge, but the quantities of firepower en route to the Middle East is a lot more than what Iran can even hope to contend with. And that is something that they will likely regret not rushing to the negotiating table. But nonetheless, Colonel Ben Shalom, looking at the broad picture, how should Israel prepare for this?
First, militarily, because every time we say that all options are on the table, we have to make sure that there is a loaded gun on the table and we know how to use it. Also, here for many years, there was speculation of how powerful our capabilities are. Can we halt or postpone? But again, one of the symptoms of this war, of showing the true face, we also demonstrated our ability to penetrate Iran airspace, to take out any target that we want, specifically here to neutralize their strategic air defense. And when they tried to launch hundreds of projectiles towards Israel, hardly any of them do any damage. So even here, the balance has been shown. Certainly, Israel is a small country. We're not a global power with global reach and global abilities, but the United States is. And since now with this new administration, we are totally aligned and flying together around the Middle East and then putting on Facebook pictures of B-52s alongside F-35s, but I think even here, this is very clear to Iran. Perhaps with a nuclear issue, for the first time ever, I can say that Iran won't have nuclear weapons. Now, you know how much I hate the forceful rhetoric, Jonathan, and I'm not threatening. I don't like all this terminology with hell. Hell will break loose. But I can assess that Iran will not have a nuclear weapon because you see the determination. Israel says so. The Americans say so. They will not possess a nuclear weapon. For them, probably the only calculation now is how. Will we stop it on our own, change course, tell the world that we're doing it under coercion, maybe even for their calculation? I saw an assessment by someone at INSS. Maybe even for their own calculation, it would be better to get hit militarily because that's not going to be the end of the regime. Perhaps capitulating to our rhetoric will be the end of the regime. So they'll say, okay, so hit a few tunnels, take out some of our abilities, postpone it for 2 years. I think those will be their calculations. The only thing we will not see is a nuclear weapon in the hands of Iran because none of us can allow that to happen.
General Rosen, in the last minute and a half, from a American-Israeli perspective, to what degree should they prepare for the day after the Ayatollah regime in the event that this escalates into a full-fledged war?
That's a good question. Look, Iran is a very big country with huge resources, a very diverse society, and I think trying to foresee exactly how Iran looks after the Ayatollahs capitulate is, more than looking into the crystal ball. It's really hard to do anywhere, and in the Middle East, I think more than any place in the world, it's very hard to understand where things are going. I think we should consider two things with being humble about how much we can actually influence things in countries such as Iran and elsewhere in the world. Iran will define its own destiny. The people of Iran and the rulers of Iran, until now, in the last, since 1979, we have seen a regime that has done, created havoc in the whole Middle East. It's a bad ruling clan that has turned much, much worse from the Shah that they, sort of took down in 1979. They became 10 times or 100 times worse than them. And I think everybody understands that. And I don't think they will survive for much longer. And the bottom line is, I think, focus. Bringing down the Ayatollahs is a huge, huge mission for the international community, for Israel, of course, for the United States, even as a global power. It will take a lot of effort and a lot of coordination between allies. And I think that if we hold them back and eyes on the ball on the nuclear program, not letting them get there, hopefully Iran will go down in a way which will be better and not worse in the next 50 years.
With that, General Sofrin, Colonel Ben Shalom, and General Rosen, thank you so very much for all of your valuable insights. And I'd like to thank all of you at home as well. Until our next edition from here in Jerusalem, Shalom. For more of TV7's productions and editorials, we invite you to visit our website at TV7Israelnews.com.